The third of my Hello World applications is going to use Windows Presentation Foundation as a UI platform to show you how to use F# as a general purpose programming language. To begin with, I'm going to create a new project once more, new project which is again a standard F# application. I'm going to call this one Hello World Wpf. As you can see at this point, we don't have a lot of standard templates for F# applications, unfortunately, within Visual Studio. It is possible to create your own ones, but the standard ones don't cover a lot of use cases like Wpf and similar, so you always have to do a little bit of work yourself. Create this one. There we go. One of the first things I need for my new Wpf application is a XAML file that represents the main window of the application. It isn't entirely easy to add one to this project because the template for adding a XAML file is not available for this console application. So there's one option to just add an XML file, call it XAML, and then start editing it. Or you can use Blend to create a XAML file, or go any other way, like an existing Wpf project or similar. In this case, I'm just going to add a very small file that I've already prepared, which is right here in my temp folder, and it has the extension XAML, mainwindow.xaml. Here we go. And I'm just going to use this one. Now I've got the file in my project, I need to configure the build action on it. In a normal Wpf solution or project, Visual Studio uses a specific build action in order to compile the XAML code and include it in the assembly. Unfortunately, we can't really do that here for technical reasons. I don't want to go into those details of building Wpf too deeply. Now what I'm going to do instead is use the build action of resource in order to include the XAML file in my assembly so that I can load it back from code. Moving on from here, let's just have a very quick look at the XAML file itself. Here we go. That's what it is. It's got a window with the title and height and width set. It's got a button, and I would like to hook myself into this button, which goes by the name of click button right here, and react to somebody clicking that button and say, hello world. Before we can get into code to start doing this, I need to add a bunch of references that are not currently included in this application in order to support the Wpf infrastructure. In the references dialog, I'm going to find and add all those assembly references that Wpf requires. I'm going to start with presentation core and a whole bunch of others. Okay, now I can finally move on to code to load my main form, hook up to the button, and do whatever I want to do. Let's start by opening some namespaces. We've seen that already, so I'm going to go for system, system.windows, and also system.windows.controls. There we go. Now the first thing I want to do is define a little helper function that will load my main window. So let's call this function load window. And we're going to make it a function, and that's why I need to enter the opening and closing parens of an empty parameter list. If I leave those out, the code may still compile, something to be careful with in F#, but I would actually be defining a value as opposed to a function, and that's an important difference in this context. The let keyword, as you can see, is used here just like we've seen before for simple values. So I'm using the equals sign, and I can then indent the following line of my code by one tab, which is the way that F# uses white space to distinguish the structure of my code. And I'm going to continue by defining a value called resource locator here, which is a new URI. And this URI is going to point to my resource in my own assembly. So I'm going to have hello world Wpf. That's the name of my assembly itself. And then it goes component. So this is basically a standard URL string that the .NET Framework knows how to deal with in this situation to reference the file mainwindow.xaml within my own resource section of this assembly. Comma, and I need the URI kind, which is relative in this case. There we go. I don't need any line termination character or anything, so at the end of this line, let me jump back there again. There we go. I don't have any semicolon or anything like that. F# terminates its lines automatically. Now with this resource locator in hand, I can go ahead and load the actual resource, which is the application.load component method that I want to use, pointing this at my resource locator. There we are. Now this thing will return the loaded resource to me. Let me point at this window thing, and you can see that the type of this is currently an object. That is the F# shortcut for the standard system.object based class of the .NET framework. Just like you know in C# you can call the system.object just object with a lowercase o. The same is true in F#, but the shortcut provided by the language for this purpose is just called obj. Okay, so this is what it is right now. I would like to type this now because I know that it has a particular type. My XAML code, after all, actually declares a window type in here. So I should be able to cast this to window, and I'm going to do this using the : greater than cast operator. I'm going to get back to casting in a little while to see how this works particularly. So I'm going to cast this to a window, which again changes the type of my window variable out front here, and now it says this is a window. Okay, so that worked perfectly. Now with this window in hand, I can go and say window.findName like this, and I'm going to find an element within my window, which is the click button. And I'm going to cast the click button itself to a button. Now with this button, I can attach to its click event, and I'll just go add, and add a lambda expression as an event handler. Now I'm not interested in any parameters, which is why I'm using this wildcard operator here, basically the underscore. I don't care about the parameters of the event handler itself. I'll just run a message box from here, messagebox.show, and say hello world, like this. Now one more thing I need to do here. In F#, I cannot just ignore return values of functions. It's generally regarded to be a bad thing in functional languages to be ignoring return values, because return values are judged to be the main reason to be calling functions in the first place. Now you probably know that the messagebox.show method actually has a return value, and right now if I was just going to close my paren here and then end my function, I'm getting an error marked in here which says this expression was expected to have type unit, which is basically F#'s way of saying it should not have a return value, but it has a return value type, which is messagebox.result. So in this situation, I would like to ignore the return value, and the way to do this is to pipe the return value into another helper function that F# provides, which is conveniently called ignore. And the ignore function is just basically going to swallow this return value that I'm not interested in at all. Now this operator I'm using here is the pipe and greater sign, and it takes the return value from what is on the left side of the operator and passes it as a parameter to the function on the right side of the operator. That's all it does. Okay, so I've got my button click event handler hooked up to my lambda expression, and so I should be able to react to somebody clicking the button, and I will then show my own message box. Now one more thing I need to do. I'm still in the process of declaring this function called load window, and quite obviously I expect this function to load my window, which it already does. But being a functional language, I would also like to return this newly loaded window into the calling scope, so to speak. So I need a return value from this function, and in order to define one, I'll just put window in here, because in F# the last value that is evaluated within a particular function declaration will be the return value of the function itself. That's how it always is. And in this case, I just need to put the value name window on its own line to make sure that this becomes my return value. Okay, with all this in place, the only thing that's still missing in my little application right here is a main program, because right now nothing is really going to happen when I run this. I could do so. Let's just give this just a little try to show you that nothing whatsoever happens, because while I am declaring this little function here, I'm not currently calling it from anywhere. And of course, because I would like to make this a Wpf application, I will also need to run the Wpf application infrastructure in the right way that Wpf expects in order to bootstrap all its own infrastructure and bring up the main window and so on. So what I need to do is have a main application here, and the main application in Wpf would normally instantiate a class called application. There we go. And on this application instance, I would then call a run method and pass in a window. So my load window gives me the window in question. I'm passing this to the run function, and this whole expression again renders a return value, which I don't care about, so I'm just going to add my pipe to ignore at the end. And there's one final thing that I need to do. This little piece of code right here now comprises my main program, so to speak. There is no special markup involved in any way. You're going to see later how this works with modules and everything else, but for now you just need to understand that this little piece of code that is on the top level of my code file automatically becomes my main program. And I can, for that reason, apply attributes to this little piece of code that I would like to apply to the main method of my application. You may be aware that I need to apply an attribute here, which is called sta_thread, in order to make sure that I get my main application code running in the correct threading model, and I just apply this attribute to this line of code. That's the syntax for applying an attribute in F# with the bracket as well as the angle bracket combined to denote attribute application. Right, and that's me all set, so I'm just going to run this application and hope everything works. There we go, my main window is there, it looks just like it should, and I'm going to click the button and it says hello world.